In the United States, we pay more for pharmaceuticals than any nation in the entire world. And nowhere has that been more apparent than with weight loss drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. When they were first released to the American public, the list price for Ozempic was 808% higher than Germany, 906% higher than the UK, and 1,027% higher than France. Costs have come down significantly since then. The lowest cost in the US is now only about 3,864% higher than what it actually costs to make. But with millions of people already taking them and a new celebrity endorsing a new version of a weight loss drug every other day, this price gap is going to seriously impact American businesses and the economy at large. In fact, forecasts estimate that 25 million Americans will be taking GLP-1s by 2030. So I decided to research why these drugs cost so much more in the United States and what they really cost to make. Is this a pure profit play from Big Pharma, or do these prices actually reflect the true cost of producing these drugs? Let's dive in. So first things first, I should probably say these drugs are pretty incredible. It's amazing that scientists were able to identify and develop a drug that could successfully lower weight loss without the life-altering consequences that previous weight loss drugs had. Previous pharmaceutical iterations of weight loss drugs like fen-phen had pretty disastrous consequences, and many people paid a much higher price for taking those drugs. And I'm not talking about money. But because these current newer drugs are relatively well tolerated, the number of Americans taking them is increasing by the millions here. And around 50% of Americans say that they'd be interested in taking GLP-1s in the future to suppress hunger and lose weight. And this is becoming very costly in the United States. Effectively, this drug company created a drug that millions of Americans want and are willing to pay for, meaning a huge amount of American money is now flowing overseas and helping prop up the economy of Denmark. In recent years, weight loss drugs accounted for nearly 50% of Denmark's total GDP growth. It got so ridiculous that economists now sometimes separate the country's economic growth into with Novo Nordisk and without Novo Nordisk. Here's a look at these projections for the next few years if the number of people taking GLP-1s continues to rise in the United States. So is this just another example of a big pharmaceutical company trying to make major profits off of Americans? They admittedly don't have the best reputation when it comes to putting profits over patients. Well, let's take a look at how much it costs to create drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy. After accounting for manufacturing, injector pens, packaging, and reasonable profit margins, the estimated cost to produce these drugs is still nowhere near what Americans are paying at the pharmacy counter. The nonprofit organization Doctors Without Borders found that making GLP-1 drugs like semaglutide only costs somewhere between 89 cents and $4.73 for a month's supply. So why are pharmaceutical companies charging Americans over $1,000 before drug rebates and discounts? Well, there's three major reasons. Let's get into them. So I don't want to give a totally biased take here. To be fair to pharmaceutical companies, it is ridiculously expensive to bring a new drug to market, and it's very risky for them too, especially if they fail. One of the most widely cited estimates found that developing a new drug costs around $2.6 billion once you factor in failed drug candidates, years of research, and the cost of tying up investor money for over a decade. Adjusted for inflation, that estimate would be closer to $3.5 billion today. So yes, these absolutely cost real money to make, but here's where things start to go off the rails. As a whole, every other country pays lower costs than the USA for pharmaceuticals. And if everybody's buying the exact same drug, why are Americans paying so much more for it? The first reason is that the US as a whole does not directly cap launch prices for prescription drugs, especially for work-sponsored insurance. This is basically where most Americans get insurance from their work. But in countries like Germany, France, and Japan, the government acts as one giant buyer negotiating on behalf of the entire population. And if the drug company wants access to that market, even if it's at a loss, the government can effectively say, we'll cover your drug, but at this price. If the drug company refuses, they risk losing access to millions of customers at once. Again, even if it's at a loss, it still makes a big impact if you're losing out on millions or potentially billions of dollars. And drug costs in the United States work very differently. Our system is fragmented between private insurers, employers, pharmacy benefit managers, Medicare, Medicaid, and cash-paying patients, which effectively means that pharmaceutical companies can charge whatever the market will tolerate. And because so many foreign governments force prices lower, the United States has effectively become the industry's profit center. Americans subsidize a huge share of global pharmaceutical profits. The second major reason that Americans pay more is patents and exclusivity. When a company develops a successful drug like Ozempic or Wegovy, they receive patent protection that temporarily blocks competitors from producing generic versions. That exclusivity period is designed to help companies recover research and development costs before cheaper competition enters the market. And for these name brand GLP-1 drugs, demand exploded before true generic competition ever entered the market. Currently, there's still no FDA approved generic version of Ozempic available in the United States, which means Novo Nordisk still controls one of the most in-demand drug categories on earth with limited direct competition. The third reason for Americans' higher prices is marketing. The United States is just one of 2 countries on earth that allows direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising on this scale. Oftentimes, the only reason why I notice these commercials is because they have a long list of side effects that seem worse than whatever the drug is actually solving. But these campaigns are not cheap by any means. And on top of them, drug companies also spend heavily marketing directly to physicians, insurance companies, and pharmacy benefit managers. And many of those entities get a cut. So that's why American drug costs are higher. But even by American standards, these prices are becoming difficult to sustain long term. And cracks are just beginning to show for these pharmaceutical giants. Starting in 2027, Ozempic is expected to become one of the first GLP-1 drugs subject to Medicare price negotiations under the Inflation Reduction Act. And on top of that, there's the rise of compounding pharmacies and telehealth companies. Once compounded versions of semaglutide started appearing online for about $149 a month, pharmaceutical companies suddenly faced something that they hadn't really dealt with before: price competition. Almost immediately, major drug makers responded by launching their own direct-to-consumer discount programs ranging from $199 to $499 per month, depending on the product and dose, which tells us something very important. If these companies can suddenly slash prices by hundreds of dollars the moment competition appears, then the original prices were never purely about manufacturing costs in the first place. If you found this video interesting, you'd like to see more like it in the future, please consider subscribing for more. This is Tyler Detchover. Thanks for watching.